Hi everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Desteni I Process live Google Hangout. In this Hangout, we're continuing with our series about destiny and the destiny principles and the Desteni I process. And we are picking up from where we left off in the last Hangout last Thursday, where we talked about self-forgiveness statements. In this Hangout, we're talking about self-corrective statements and self-commitment statements and how you can use these statements to support yourself to change on a practical level in your own daily life. As always, you're welcome to ask questions. If you have any questions about points that you've experienced to be difficult to change, for example, or where you have applied self-forgiveness and you found it difficult how to change the point, you're very much welcome to share your example, and we will give perspectives on how self-corrective statements for yourself to support yourself to change. To do that, we have invited Marlene Vargas del Razo from Mexico. Hey, Marlene.
Hi, Anna. Hi, everyone.
So let's jump straight into it. What are self-corrective and self-commitment statements, and why are they so important to the process that we're walking of self-change?
Yes, so as I give a context to what we've walked before in this Hangout in relation to self-forgiveness, this is a kind of like the nitty-gritty process, I'd like to say, when it comes to really getting down to the point of self-correction and self-creation, which is implied through the processes both of self-corrective statements and self-commitment statements. So self-corrective statements are, in essence, the process wherein once you have written out the self-forgiveness, you are able to emotional or creating a feeling or another experience or behavioral pattern that you are now willing to correct about yourself. So let's say that I forgive myself for having accepted and allowed myself for perceiving myself as being overweight when I am wearing particular pieces of clothing and fearing that others might see me as fat. So that's an example wherein we can look at, well, the experience is me judging myself as fat or overweight, for example. And so how am I going to correct this? Because I certainly do not like the experience of feeling bad or feeling ugly or feeling unattractive, for example. So the self-corrective statement is that moment when I structurally through writing decide to express how through me identifying this pattern that I've written out, for example, in my daily writing, and how I am going to be realizing what is it that I'm missing about myself in that moment. So the structure goes the following way. When and as I see myself feeling or perceiving myself as looking fat, when I am wearing this particular type of clothes or fabric or very tight clothes, and I believe that others are looking at me as overweight or fat or unattractive because I'm looking overweight or something like that, I stop and I breathe. Now, when and as I see myself, that is essentially when you take out from the self-forgiveness that you've written out, what is the pattern, what gets activated in that moment, which implies when I perceive myself that I'm wearing this and how others see me. So it implies that I am giving power to how others see me, affecting me according to an idea of myself, like I'm unattractive, I'm looking ugly, or something like that. So as I was mentioning, you mentioned the pattern. When and as I see myself feeling myself as fat or ugly or unattractive when wearing this particular type of clothes, I stop and I breathe, which is the moment wherein one certainly at times goes through it as if it was like I stop and I breathe, but it's really a stop. I bring myself back to my physical body, which means that I then stop being possessed or being overwhelmed by the experience or idea or perception of me being fat or judging myself as fat or considering how others might be judging me.
Yeah,
so this is a very key point to stop there, to really become physically aware of what am I allowing within myself. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I was going to say that it's a literal form of deprogramming or deep brainwashing ourselves, because before the self-forgiveness, we would have just participated in the pattern. And oh my God, and I feel so fat, and it's just like running automatic, maybe for many, many years. And what I've certainly experienced is, why can't I change it? Why do I keep experiencing myself like this? I understand that I shouldn't be bothered by it, but it still comes up. And then when we work the self-forgiveness process, that's where the seeing comes in, that we see, oh, I was judging myself, oh, I was giving value to this point. And until then, we might not have even seen that point. So that's also the referring back to the when and as I see, which requires that process of self-honesty. And then when you say I stop, it's literally stopping something, like stopping a wheel from turning.
Exactly, because we are so, as you were mentioning, we are so used to having these particular possessions or patterns, behaviors so ingrained within ourselves that, that's why we say first do your writing, do your self-forgiveness, as that's the identification of the points wherein I am allowing myself to be possessed by a particular idea, perception of myself. So that is the previous point we walked. That was the identifying, what am I going to be changing? But with self-corrective statements, it is literally, as you were mentioning, like a deprogramming piece of information that we are writing out, an instruction of how we are going to become aware of that moment entirely, when and as I see, which means in the moment, in that situation, in that very possible, maybe that it will repeat in that same moment when I experience this once again, I will stop myself, I breathe, and then I realize that I am becoming possessed by this image or self-image judgment that I've carried throughout my entire life of me being overweight or me being or looking fat with this particular type of clothes. And within that, I also realize that I'm giving value to what others might think of me, or I am even projecting into what others might be thinking of me. So it goes hand in hand then with what I see, I realize about myself, and so you start listing out, so to speak, the realization of what am I becoming possessed by, what am I accepting and allowing, like allowing the judgments of others to affect me, allowing my own pattern of many years to be reactivated and played out by myself once again. I mean, it's like, wow, I am doing this to myself. Is this really supportive? Is this really going to change me in that moment? Of course not, because we've only lived as memories. So this is the point where we, just like the trigger point, just like that activation, so to speak, like that activation code or point or image or situation where we have automated certain reactions, behaviors. So this is why it is very important to identify the pattern in itself when and as it happens, so that I begin realizing, okay, what am I being possessed by, so to speak.
And then what about the self-commitment?
Yeah, so once that you've went through realizing, okay, I'm getting possessed by this experience of or belief of me being fat or what others will say, now it comes the real nitty-gritty of the situation, which is learning what am I going to be doing, in fact. This is the point of self-creation that comes with self-commitment. We tend to simply believe that with self-forgiveness, everything will be done. Like, I've identified the point, I have self-forgiven it, it should be away now. But what happens is that in our minds, whenever we self-forgive something, and we start identifying it as the root and cause of the problem of a particular experience, behavior, and so forth, it's like uprooting the bad weeds, so to speak. So because we live in the mind as pre-programmed patterns and ingrained in our very physical body, it will take also, of course, a physical process of integrating a new instruction, a new living principle, a new commonsensical way of correcting the bad seeds, so to speak. So when we look at de-weeding now with my self-forgiveness and self-corrective statements, like I've already kind of rooted out the thing, right? I don't want it any longer because I see it's not self-supportive. But now we have to now sow new seeds, so to speak. How am I going to be living from here on? How do I really actually practice physically with like an instruction manual for yourself? What aspects of yourself are you going to then recognize about you? What words do you want to live? What aspects do you see you can live out in that very moment? So in this case, we can go already maybe looking at the possible or usual, let's call it mistakes or misalignments that we create with self-commitment statements before we get into what it really is. What do you say?
To start with the mistakes. Well, I wanted to also mention in relation to self-commitment statements that it's that point of empowering yourself, and then also that that we discuss often is that when you take something out, you have to put something new in, because it's basically clearing a space within yourself. You're taking a programmed behavior out, and then you can actually exchange that, replace that with a new behavior or a new way of seeing yourself in the world that is supportive, that is constructive, that will assist you to expand. But sure, let's discuss that more as we go. So you and I have walked self-corrective statements for quite a while, and so has a lot of other people. So we've been through a lot of mistakes initially with doing these self-corrective statements. Can you share some of the mistakes that you've experienced for yourself where you wrote it out and then you found you weren't changing, for example? What could be a reason why we don't change? Because now we walked the self-forgiveness, we wrote out the statements, and nothing happens.
Yeah, one point to also point out is that we do have, throughout the process, the understanding that what we're doing is based on principles. Like, I'm going to live principles that are self-supportive for everyone, for myself, that are commonsensical, but that also requires like a certain development, meaning it does take certain practice, of course, certain practicing of common sense, like what is best for myself, and really testing it out to see whether it is and whether it is not. But how we tend to kind of encapsulate this correction is through saying, I commit myself to stand one and equal with my physical body and with everything and everyone in existence, and being forever one and equal, so to speak. I'm exaggerating a little bit here.
No, I actually did. I wrote exactly what you're saying there. And I thought, oh my God, wow, perfect. Now I'm going to go out, I'm going to be one and equal with everyone. Awesome. But that wasn't so. So why cannot we just write such a statement and then it works?
Well, because that is essentially just another conceptual idea of what change implies, which is the idealized version of ourselves in that completion of process, like becoming one and equal with everything. But hey, just look at what you're actually looking at. You're looking at a pattern that you've lived throughout your own life. So how can you even conceive everything and everyone within correcting a pattern that exists in one's own mind? So of course, it's cool to always have as a starting point, whenever we're writing self-forgiveness, self-corrective statements, and self-commitments, what is best for oneself and everyone as equals. But that is implied already. We don't really have to say it if you realize. So the reason why I also suggest this, and it is a personal perspective, is because then we can get out of the way the one and equal, one is an equality, becoming equal and one to my physical body or to everyone else, because that remains in the concept. In the mind, we resist looking at real, feasible solutions. And this is something that we have to become very aware of. We might even hit a blank, meaning saying, oh, how am I going to correct myself in that moment that I'm walking down the street and maybe I see a person that I consider attractive and I believe that I'm not looking attractive to him. How am I going to act in that moment? The reason why is because, as we say, breathing, for example, is a very simple thing to do. Yet in the mind, it is as if we want to become more, like become super powerful and more than life, so to speak, when we look at self-commitments. And it is really not about becoming more or now making myself look beautiful or believe that I am beautiful, or I commit myself to realize that I am the beauty in person. I mean, that's not the whole point. That would be just trying to create an idea of myself, of superiority, in order to be attractive to someone else, for example.
Yeah, I did that in the beginning. I wrote these like very universal, and very beautifully sounding self-corrective statements, and then I got so frustrated because I couldn't change the patterns. And then what I realized was that I have to bring it all the way down to where I am in fact, which is when I see a person that looks like that, I tend to have this thought, or then this desire comes up. What I experienced when I kind of faced that point was that, oh, but that's so like mundane, it's so trivial. So a kind of a judgment of the actual process that I had to go through to change myself, because in a way I wanted a shortcut. I wanted to become, enlightened, basically. So what do you want to say about that point of keeping it practical and to the context?
Yeah, so let's take the same example we've been walking, which is the point of how I perceive myself in a particular type of clothes. So, for example, a mistake that one could do is saying I commit myself to wear baggy clothes so that clothes are no longer tight, so I no longer feel fat, for example, or looking fat for others or to others' perceptions. That would be kind of not getting to the root and cause of the problem and a real solution, which is how I feel myself within my physical body. So in this, a real commitment would be like I commit myself to be physically present as my physical body, to realize that my physical body is a living presence here and that I am not defined by an image or how others may see me or judge me, because I realize that, you know, uh, in the commitment, it is the how am I going to live that moment. So it is really as simple as I breathe and I commit myself to keep walking to my destination without participating any longer in the desire for a relationship or attraction toward others or how I look toward others. So it is really like I commit myself to be able to walk through the street and feel comfortable as breath as I move in my physical body toward my destination. There you don't participate any longer in how I look, how others look at me, how am I feeling as the image of myself, but rather focus on my physical body. How am I moving? Or maybe, becoming aware of security situations. For example, in my case, if someone is following me or if someone looks suspicious or something like that, it's like more realistic instead of whether I am attractive to another person or not.
This is a really cool point, because I've used to found that I would say in my commitment or my corrective statements, I would say, for example, when and as I see that I'm being inferior, and then I wouldn't change the point. And then what I realized was that often I wouldn't see that I was being inferior, because already when I was feeling inferior, I was kind of already becoming mind possessed. And then what I found I could do instead was to kind of bring the trigger point, or the reversal of the trigger point, the point where I correct myself even further back in the timeline, which is when and as I see that my palms are becoming sweaty, or that I'm shaking inside myself, or like using the physical indication that something is changing, something is happening, or when and as I feel that my heart starts pounding. For example, it could be in relation to the anxiety that one might experience if one suddenly becomes paranoid and feels that someone is hunting me. But often we won't actually see, oh, I'm becoming paranoid, but the physical change in one's body is very, once you start noticing it, is very evident. And that could be a suggestion to sort of move that point even further up. And what you can also do with that is actually stop before it becomes a possession. So do you have other tips in relation to how to make it more practical for oneself?
Yeah, other points is when we say, what I've noticed is that when I repeat the same things that I'm going to stop, which I've previously written out in self-corrective statements, like I realize that I have to stop being this or that, or feeling fat, or caring about what others think of me. I've already said that. So it's really like an effort of writing out the self-commitment as I commit myself to, and outline, describe, give myself an instruction of what am I going to be living. Because if I say I commit myself to not continue thinking of what others are doing and saying, I kind of already repeat that. And if one leaves it at that, you really don't give yourself a new direction of how are you going to be living from that moment on.
So
So
can you,
that's why,
sorry, go ahead.
so in the commitment statement that I've placed in relation to how am I going to live myself when being out in the street and being comfortable with my body, that's a real instruction to myself. That's a real direction that I can give to me in order to be in stability, walking here as my physical body, wherein I am aware of my movements, of my posture, for example, like working through my own comfortability at a physical level instead of at the image or self-image level. That's more tangible, that's more real. Now we could go into other examples when it requires not only like a mind change, but maybe other skills that I require to work through. So we can look at that, but you were going to say something?
No, no, it's cool. I would actually like to share that. Let's say that, for example, I go to the gym and I really want to lift some weights, or I really want to work on a machine, and I see this guy next to me and he's just running and he's just doing it, and I try and I feel weak, and then I start feeling bad about it, and why can't I be like him? So if we take such an example, how could I then utilize self-corrective statements and obviously also self-forgiveness in that context to support myself?
Okay, so let's walk it practically like self-forgiveness. I forgive myself for having accepted and allowed myself to feel inferior, weak, less capable of doing the same running capacity that I see that the guy next to me is doing at the gym, wherein I feel inferior, not good enough, or just plainly out of shape to do this type of exercises. So then we go to the self-corrective statements, which is taking that very same pattern identified in the self-forgiveness and walking it through the, let's call it formula or words, wherein I place the pattern in observation. When and as I see myself feeling inferior to seeing what others are capable of doing at the gym, like running faster than myself, or doing it for a longer period of time and going into inferiority or feeling weak or less capable than them, I stop myself in that moment. Obviously, if you're running, not stop yourself, but stopping in the mind, I stop myself, I focus on my physical body, I breathe, and I realize that I haven't really even known how much time that person has been at the gym. Maybe he's been for years at it, and that's why he's so capable of running 5 miles, but well, I only can 1 mile, you know. Or maybe, he's a male, and at a certain point, muscles and even condition is also affected when being a female. Or maybe, I haven't only I have only been working out for 1 week, so I'm already expecting myself to be like the winner of it all when I have only started. Like we tend to want to equate ourselves without taking these physical, tangible reality aspects into consideration.
It's a cool point because it's actually like in that moment you come back to the reality of yourself, where you can then really support yourself, because what otherwise might have happened if you hadn't had self-forgiveness and self-corrective statements is that you would have tried outrunning him or been like, okay, I gotta pull myself together and
I gotta stop up, man.
yeah, or like doing things that might actually be self-abusive or self-destructive in order to fulfill that mind judgment, in order basically to try and feel better about what one has already done to oneself in the mind. So through self-forgiveness and self-corrective statements, we take that entire point and let go of it, and then can come back to, oh, why is it I am here? What is it I'm doing here? Or even go and ask him, hey, how cool that you can run 5 miles. How did you get in that position? And then actually learn. Which is a really cool point that I would say is humbling when all of us have never actually had such tools in our lives before. I want to talk to you about that, but first I also want to mention, because when you
but we haven't finished with the self-commitment.
Oh, yes, yes.
So okay. Self-corrective. So in the self-corrective statements, as we were mentioning, the realizations are key aspects wherein you, as Anna was saying, you bring yourself back to earth, like looking at what wasn't I considering a physical reality in this situation. It's like we really tend to simply look at the mind comparison and the ideals without really earthing ourselves, which means looking at practical reality, the facts, instead of the ideals. So that's how, in this case, we step down from the competition mode or wanting to be better than the other and take into consideration physical reality. So once that is done, you go on to the self-commitments, which is in essence when you commit yourself to change yourself in who you are in that moment that you will be running next to the same guy next time you go to the gym, for example. So now that you've realized everything that you've missed, you now can give yourself a clear direction of how am I going to be living this moment and from this moment on. Such as I commit myself to go to the gym, to exercise myself, and to simply work on my own ability and my own expansion of my physical capability, so to speak, as I go training, because I realize that it requires space-time, consistency, practice to get to a certain level, such as being able to run 5 miles or something like that. Hypothetical example, but this is entirely to place into consideration that if I want to support myself, to improve myself, there is a physical space-time process that I require to take on to maybe not even get to that level or maybe go beyond it. Who knows? But that's not the starting point of what I'm doing. I'm doing it for the sake of my own physical support, my own enjoyment as exercise, and I do not any longer go into the comparison point. So you focus on writing out the commitments of what you're going to be living in that moment, regardless of who is around you or who's looking at you or anything like that, right? You're doing it for you. So that's also a very key point to understanding the self-commitments. It is about you changing you for yourself within the consideration of what is best for you and also what could be applicable to everyone else as what's best for all.
Yeah, that's a cool point. I wanted to add another mistake that I've done in the past, which if we take such an example, it could be that, okay, in the self-forgiveness statements, I realized that I was comparing myself and I realized that I was judging myself as being inferior. What I would then do in the self-corrective statements is that I would say, when and as I see that I'm accepting myself to compare myself to others and be inferior, I stop. And that is obviously accurate because that was part of the pattern that was playing out. But it can be very difficult to change all patterns of inferiority and all points of comparisons at once. Especially if it's something that we face in many situations with many people. And so that can also be one of the reasons why if we walk such a commitment statement and then we face, our boss and we feel inferior and then we're like, but I wrote the self-commitment statement, why am I not changing? So what I found is that often it doesn't have to be like that always, but in many cases it is very supportive to keep it to the specific situation. And then from there one can actually expand to other patterns or similar situations. And even by walking that correction in the gym can assist you to walk the correction in with the boss. But what I found this point of tending to trying to generalize and take everything at once. And within that also a kind of wanting to take a shortcut and get it over with. Is this something that you've experienced, and do you have any perspectives on why it is that we do that and how to keep it more specific?
Yeah, I'm certainly quite a fan of always getting to the nitty-gritty point. Like, I do want to uproot this thing that is bugging me. I don't really like leaving traces behind or here and there. So I do push myself. I do have found points wherein I know that I am living like a missing link, because there's a specific point that I really don't want to give up or leave out of my self-definition, for example. So there is also that self-sabotage factor, so to speak, that we have to be aware of, and that also comes through when we maybe haven't even walked the self-forgiveness with that entire decision of changing oneself, of taking genuine self-responsibility. Because that's when, you walk everything and you get to the self-commitments and it's like, okay, I commit myself to be here present while running in the gym. But you really haven't looked at the actual pattern or the actual point that you were taking self-responsibility for. So it's in essence, okay, I take self-responsibility for this, but if more points emerge that I see require further looking at, then I rather stop myself from wanting to rush into the end and be like kind of realized and I'm done, you know, I solved my problem now. We really have to understand that if we're doing this for ourselves for the very first time, I suggest doing it once and doing it thoroughly. Like not doing the law of the least effort, because this is ultimately for ourselves. It's not for someone to qualify or to become more or better. No, it's really just aligning ourselves to something that we should have always lived by and as, but that we simply haven't done it because we have lived through the mind, through energy, through ideas, all of it which is not real.
This is a cool point. I realized a couple of years ago that such shortcuts, because I was a fan of taking shortcuts, and what I realized is that they actually shortcuts become detours. So when you think that you're taking a shortcut, which would be not getting all the roots out, being like, yeah, well, I took most of it, I'll leave this one. And then you come back six months later and the whole weed is outgrown your garden, you know? So rather, it's actually a point of actually doing it quicker to just get the whole thing out while you're at it.
Yeah, if you look at it from that perspective, it does make sense to do it once, do it thoroughly, so that you don't have to deal with it with that point. Yet another self-sabotage point, wherein we believe that I can look at it later, such as the commitment statements. Also, another point, you know, like I commit myself to continue looking at this point of impatience that I'm experiencing here and there, or I commit myself to continue writing self-forgiveness about sadness, yeah. This. And why not doing it in that moment? You know, yes. You are there, you're looking at the point already, so why leaving it to some other time, who knows when, right?
That's a very cool point. We have a question from Rep Dalmas, and she's asking, cool, Anna, I realized I'm just going to select the question. I realized lately that I allow myself, once immersed in an emotion, that simply stopping the feeling of being overwhelmed would assist me. Can you give some pointers on this? So once immersed in an emotion, that simply stopping the feeling of being overwhelmed would assist me. Can you give some pointers on this? And I would say that this is actually a really cool point that we haven't mentioned yet, which could be a physical self-correction where you don't necessarily write anything down, but where you actually stop and correct yourself in the moment, simply by seeing, okay, I'm possessed, I'm in an emotion, okay, I'm going to stop and I'm going to breathe and take a walk or whatever. So do you want to give some perspective on that, Malin?
Yeah, it would be like the quantum applications, which of course it is something that you also, you know, after being for some time in process, you can get to apply. I wouldn't really suggest this to do for people that are barely beginning the process, because it becomes yet another shortcut wherein we believe that I stop, I breathe, I'm stable, and that's it. But one hasn't before. Yeah, exactly. One hasn't really investigated before. What was the starting point, the triggering point? What am I really going into suppression when just saying I'm stable, I'm here, I'm present, I walk? Yeah. So this is like the kind of applications that you're able to do once that you have mostly been walking for a while, and you've already identified maybe the same pattern, so that you don't necessarily have to write it once again. But you're now in the application phase. So what Rev is saying is precisely that application phase. Like you are already aware of the emotion or the experience or the overwhelmingness at any level. So you already see it. That's the first point. You're already like one step into the correction process. So now you know that you must stop. So you stop, breathe, and get into your physical body, and that's it. You maybe don't even require to go into the I realize that I am being spiteful toward that person, or that I am becoming anxious because I believe someone is following me, something like that, you know. So you already know from maybe past points that you've written out, so you are already at the application phase. That's how I could interpret this, and I mean that's what I've also done myself. Like if I know that I have to go to a certain place and I would usually become nervous, I then practice on the breathing. You know, it's like the physical process of breathing, because I already walked previously many times through that pattern of the expectations, the time, the anxiety. So it's merely now then walking the living physical process of breathing, stabilizing oneself, and that is really supportive. Yes, it's part of the correction, of course. So that's my perspective.
It's also cool because within that we can also see the progression that actually happens, where initially, you know, the possession might last several days or many hours, and then as you continue walking the self-corrective process, it's like, because it's kind of like a timeline where you have something that triggers, and then that happens, and then you become emotional, and then you become more emotional, and then, you know, so you have these how could say, patterns that trigger one another. And so through the self-forgiveness and the self-corrective process, you can actually make that window smaller and smaller and smaller, where eventually you just see, oh, something is coming up, and I stop. But obviously that's a process that we all have to go through, and it's not about becoming enlightened, or that this is like this magic tool that will happen to you. So let me also ask about this, Mullen, because I think that's something that many might experience, that both self-forgiveness and self-corrective statements are like kind of like a spell almost. And I know that in spirituality, for example, you have positive affirmations where you would say, you know, I am beautiful, I am good, I am the light, kind of like mantras.
The sun,
like
I am the rain, I am the
yes.
earth, the wind.
So what would you say is the difference between that and self-corrective statements, and also in that context, like in terms of ourselves being the key to the actual change, where the self-corrective statement is more a tool of support?
It's the reality factor. It's the applicability factor. The ability to direct something oneself. Like I cannot say as a correction, for example, I am strong and I am all empowered, or I am really the most fit man in the world, when talking about the gym example, because that is not real, man. I mean, that's just another idea that I would create to make myself look better, or in my mind feel better than the other person. When
or saying I can, oh, yeah. And then maybe your body couldn't, you know. Yeah,
exactly. So that's the reality factor, the physical factor. It's always taking physical reality into consideration. Out practical directive, it's like an instruction that as you read it, as you write it, you say, I can certainly do this, I can certainly apply this, I see myself doing this when I'm with this or that person, or I'm at the gym, or I'm walking down the street, I can live this out. And maybe sometimes, you know, you have to really be practical and simple. And this is also another thing, that we tend to see the simple practical solutions, such as breathing and being comfortable, practicing to be comfortable with my physical body, to be difficult. Why? Because we're so used to creating an entire image and posture of ourselves when we go out into the world. So it is really about getting back to that simplicity of what physical reality and living is in fact, wherein living is not an experience. So that's why we tend to create an experience of I am one and equal, I am all physical being, and that kind of uplifts oneself at a mind level. Because if I see myself as my physical body, I am not really aware of everything as one and equal as myself right now. I'm really aware of my physical body, my movements, my gestures, my voice tonality, and how I'm speaking to you. That's where I am at the moment, and that's what I am able to direct as myself. So physical reality factor is the key point here, to not go up a level into the mind experience or self-definitions of better than, more than, power, control, whatever. Because that's also another point, like I commit myself to have control over my emotions. And there you're already separating yourself from your emotions and your mind in the first place, trying to kind of have a grab on it and seize it. But that's just the battle being kind of overrun or won by you, instead of realizing I direct myself one and equal as my mind, as my physical body, in stability. And, you know, even in sounding this, it has to be within a point of stability as well. It cannot be like, I am the sun, I am life, I am one and equal, you know, or uplifting yourself in the mind. No, it's really like, I direct myself to go out, I walk, I practice my physical comfortability, I breathe, I ensure that I have maybe even proper shoes to walk, so that my walking out in the street is not based on how others are going to see me, and I wear comfortable clothes, not for how I look, but how I'm going to be supporting myself throughout my day.
So
And made
it's
it. So, yeah, go
So
ahead.
it's essentially giving yourself back to yourself, which is quite a gift. And then also how I've also seen self-corrective statements is that it's kind of like, that we're in this ocean, which is our world and our reality and relationships and all these emotions, like this stormy ocean. And then self-corrective statements is like throwing out an anchor into the future. Because when I'm sitting and writing, it's quiet, I'm with myself, I can direct this ocean through my words. And then what I can do is I can sit here and I can throw an anchor, so that when I am in that stormy ocean, I have that anchor to come back to myself.
Very cool point there. And yes, the anchoring process, the earthing process, the self-stability process, that it's when you literally get back to yourself and you give yourself back to you, as it said, wherein you're no longer then subject to the subtleties, the chaos, the mayhem that goes around in our everyday lives or in our own mind, but that we also realize that that stability, that comfortability, that ability to be here as myself is always here as myself. It's not something that I have to create or become or think positively about. It's really about something that is already here as myself every single moment that I'm here as breath. And that stability is something that no one else can give you but yourself. As simple as that.
Cool. Before we finish here with this hangout, I wanted to ask you, which is kind of in the same context, who are the human beings that we can become or that we become when we walk self-forgiveness and self-corrective application effectively for ourselves? And what are the gifts that one can, get out of it, so to speak, or can one get something out of it? Is that even a relevant way to see it?
Well, if I wouldn't see it as something that you add to yourself, but more within the context of looking at the principle that we're looking at in Destiny as being one and equal and really getting to live our utmost potential, it's to align to that or to live that which has always been here as a potential within each one of us, but that we had simply like covered up or placed obstacles upon, obfuscated ourselves from because we were living through the mind. So once you have this process of the self-corrective statements, the self-commitments, which is like the corrective aspect, once you've identified the points of change through self-forgiveness, then you get to the realization that I am able to do this because I am writing it. I see that I'm taking into consideration my physical reality. So as you apply it, as you live it, that is something that will give you, or that not give you as in separation, but that you give yourself as a point of stability, of self-honesty, which is very important in this point as well. Not living through the mind, not seeking for experiences, not wanting to become more than myself, but I really stabilize myself, wherein I no longer constantly desire to experience something, desire something or someone. I'm no longer into this anxiety, fear, judgment, projection of what others might see within me. It's really like a peace. Like if you want peace of mind, it is about realizing that we can exist as that, but it is not like I'm peaceful and I'm just done. No, it's actually walking through everything that we've been discussing to get to this point of stability, which is really being here as breathing, as breath, and that from here, in this stability, I can then create myself. I can then choose the words that I want to live in or as, such as I commit myself to be certain of myself. I commit myself to be diligent, consistent with my application, or with this point that I want to change in my life. So that's also a very important aspect of self-commitment, when we bring the words we want to live in, which is something that I direct instead of leaving them as a reaction through the mind, through pre-programmed patterns, through memories. All of that is out of my direction. So here is where I literally choose. I can choose who I can be in this moment, which within the principle of what's best for all, it's words and principles that are best for myself, and so for everyone else that I relate myself to. So
It's like a self-creation tool.
exactly. I mean, that's the whole point of this hangout as well, to realize the self-creative ability that we can give to ourselves. It is not based on having this relationship or that car or that amount of money. That's illusion.
Become your own software programmer.
Yeah, and you know, that's the starting point, but then living it out and being consistent on it, no one can take that away from you. Like, it's not something that you have to constantly be making it up or making rituals or thinking positively. No, it's actually the other way around. Practicing that self-stability and that consistency in breath, and within that, learning also how can I express myself from here on, which is a self-creative process. What do I want for myself that I see is beneficial for me? So
cool. We have, before we finish, we have a couple of comments and a question as well. Gabriel is saying, thank you for bringing this point, girls. Thank you, Gabriel. And Corinne is saying, hello, girls. Hi, Corinne. Welcome to the Hangout. And then we have a question from Andres, and he is saying, speaking loud, the self-commitment, self-corrective statements can be necessary or mandatory. Very cool points here. Thanks. You can speak the self-corrective and self-commitment statements out loud. I would say, we'll see what Marlene says. I find that it kind of depends on what the point is that I'm working with. So let's say that I'm out and about and a pattern comes up that isn't like, you know, I see it, it's quite immediate. Okay, I'm doing this is what happens. Like I see it directly in the moment. Then I can simply say, okay, I commit myself to walk through this and stop this thought, for example, in the moment. How is a lot like complicated, and it has many dimensions, and maybe I have a lot of emotions towards it, or it's a pattern that I've repeated over many years. I often find that it's more assisting for me to write self-forgiveness. However, I would also say that's something that you have to decide and see for yourself. So it's not like either is mandatory. So yeah, that would be my perspective. Marlene?
yeah, what I do is when I go writing it out, I go speaking it out loud. However, it does take practice because I'm able to type at the same time that I'm speaking. So if you're not able to do this, I would simply suggest to what I
think we lost Marlene from
suggest personally is to write it out. I did hear you. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we lost. Can you repeat what you were saying from after?
Yes.
When you, yeah, okay.
So just repeat it. So when I write the self-forgiveness and everything, the whole process of self-forgiveness, self-corrective statements, and commitments is I go speaking it out loud. But it requires a particular skill, which is typing as fast as I speak. But if you cannot do this, what I would suggest doing if you want to try this out is simply writing it out all first, and then you reread it out loud. I know it sounds like, you know, it's maybe a lot to do or something like that, but I repeat that it's kind of like the starting point of what you're willing to do for yourself. The point of sounding is, however, emphasized, for example, in interviews like the Atlanteans, where in each, for example, word, emotion, and so forth requires a particular tonality even to be walking through the self-forgiveness due to the kind of experience that one is going through at a physical level when experiencing, for example, sadness or guilt or spite and so forth. So it is suggested, I would say do it, because in that it doesn't only become something that you read or that you only write, but as you sound it, it's like, oh, I'm really doing this. And just as a reference, also when first walking self-forgiveness, to me, when I was reading it, it was like, oh, this is just so repetitive. What is this? But when I started speaking it, it became like more real, if I can say it so. So from that moment, I realized, wait a second, if I voice it, it becomes like really me saying this or doing this. So that's what I suggest.
That's a very cool point. I've also found that kind of speaking common sense to myself can be very supportive, especially if I've been like in a very emotional turmoil. So for example, taking a walk and then saying to myself, I'm really speaking out loud. Okay, so where am I? Okay, I'm having this major fear. Okay, what do I know? And then I go to the most basic truth, like where can I anchor myself in reality? What do I know is true? I'm here, I'm in this physical body. And as you were saying, it really assists to do it out loud and speak myself here, so to speak.
Oh yeah, I definitely do that as well. And at times it was like, is that thinking as well? But it's really not, because it's you directing you and getting all the points together to see why did I react that way, and kind of starting already making sense of it so that I even prevent myself from going into the experience, even if I don't have a place to write, for example, in that moment. So it's very practical as well to do it that in that manner, or even in a soft voice. You're walking through the street and going like this. And kind of to yourself, but you're here, you're present, you're giving yourself direction. So that's also very cool and practical.
Yeah, I find it very empowering to speak self-forgiveness out loud as I'm out walking. And I had a bit of resistance to it in the beginning in terms of, oh, what if people hear me and they think I'm crazy? And I don't speak, loud. But that's something that I can also recommend if you're able, like, obviously you don't want to create consequences for yourself. But for example, walking through the woods or in a less crowded area, you don't necessarily have to do it in the supermarket. Or as Malin is saying, just whisper to yourself. That is a really cool, because that's again kind of that, being out in that stormy ocean, and then you ground yourself here. I'm still here. I'm still working this process.
Yeah, these tools are really priceless. What can I say about it? I mean, I've been over 6 years walking through this, and I've become the person that I never even thought I could be in terms of stability. And I'm talking about things of like even believing myself to not be worthy of something or not capable of things that I'm doing now. So it's really getting yourself practically and through space and time process to live it to your utmost potential.
Let's let those be the words for today. So Malin, thank you so much for being here, and everyone, we will see you again next Thursday, where we're continuing the process. Process and the Desteni tools. However, on Saturday we actually have a live Google Hangout. We've started this movie Hangout series where every Saturday we're debunking movies from a Destonian perspective, and people are coming who've seen movies and who had realizations about their own lives. And on this coming Saturday, it will be the movie Her. So a lot of talk about relationships, love, attraction, all of this stuff. It's going to be really fascinating. So I definitely suggest checking in. And as always, you can always watch the Hangouts in retrospect afterwards if you aren't able to participate in the live broadcast. So thank you so much for being here, and we will see you on Saturday. Bye.
Bye.